Hi there. Thank you. Firstly, I just want to thank everyone for attending our Dare to Care event today. I know after a day at work, it can be a struggle, but thank you for joining us. We've got a packed schedule and I'm really looking forward to it. First of all, housekeeping. So the session is being recorded and we are going to share that link with people. We'll circulate it afterwards. Our plan is to create a safe space, to engage in a constructive conversation. We want everyone to respect each other's viewpoints, even if you don't agree with them. We encourage you to post comments in the chat box and ask questions. Questions and comments will be captured. Some of them will be shared. We won't be attributing them to individuals. They will be obvious in the chat box during the event, but the chat box won't be on the recording afterwards. Finally, we are not going to cover everything we want to in this 1 hour session. So the plan is to create an open discussion and provide guidance and audience input for future events. Today is just the start of the conversation and we hope you'll enjoy it. So my name's Alison Mitchell and I am your chair for tonight. So last year, the EI Highland and Islands branch and the SPE joined forces to deliver an event titled Diversity of Thought, where we showcased 3 amazing women and their careers in the energy industry, all at different stages. We wanted to deliver more events, initially with a focus on gender parity and equality. However, we had many chats and brainstorming sessions where we put the world to rights. And we decided that there were so many topics that we were all quite passionate about. We had bias, whether it's unconscious or not, mental health, inclusion, psychological safety, equality, allyship, the energy transition, the job market, careers, progression, STEM in schools, careers education, it goes on and on and on. So we realised that delivering a 1 hour event was just not going to do justice to any of these topics. And we wanted to avoid our event being seen as a tick box exercise. We didn't just want to do D&I done. So this gave us the idea of running a series of constructive conversations. After a lot of deliberation, and it was a lot, we finally came up with a hashtag Dare to Care. And just to put it in simple terms, we want to engage in discussion on topics that we all care deeply about, and we hope that you will too. Now, as I've mentioned, this event would not have happened without the planning team. So I want to give you a brief introduction to all of us. This wasn't planned, but I'll just go first. So I am Alison Mitchell. I'm volunteer committee member. I am treasurer with the EI and the D&I team lead. I've been working in business and financial roles for the energy service and supply chain for over 30 years. I've been a working parent. I'm now a woman over 50 who left the industry for a while. I am founder of Agile Resource, which is a startup with a focus on inclusive recruitment and addressing barriers and bias in the recruitment process. Angela Burnett. She's been a member of the Energy Institute Committee for over 4 years, both as STEM in Schools Ambassador and Assistant Secretary. Angela brings over 16 years experience in the energy industry and is currently carrying out work with Imran and her company AB Virtue. Angela recently joined the D&I team and looks forward to contributing to bringing change going forwards. She dares to care. Suli Chetwain. Suli sits on the SPE Aberdeen board and chairs the D&I committee with a focus on role modelling, inclusive behaviours, championing and communicating the section's D&I goals. She's founder of STEM Diversity, which is a grassroots organisation that works to ensure underrepresented groups and minorities in the energy industry can access equitable career opportunities through skills-based one-on-one mentoring. Suli also co-founded EcoEnergio, a new startup that provides automated carbon and energy solutions for efficiency and sustainability. Ritika Power. Ritika works for Emerson as a sales engineer. She's been involved with the SPE Aberdeen for more than 10 years and has been active in several committees. She's the ex-chair of the SPE Aberdeen D&I Committee, a reinvented Women in Energy Committee which was launched during Offshore Europe 2019, She's also a STEM ambassador and is involved with promoting STEM amongst young school children. And we have Katrina Dunbar. She runs her own event management company and is our EI Aberdeen branch manager. She's been helping out on the practical and technical elements of today. And so if you've got any questions or anything that you need to raise, please email her at, I noticed I said her, sorry, Katrina, at aberdeen@energyinstitute.org. I'll repeat that later. So as volunteers, our time is restricted, but we do hope to create events every quarter. We'd love to do it more frequently, but we do want your feedback on today and everything going forward. So moving on, we've also got 4 fantastic speakers tonight. You've all seen their bios by signing up, and their full bios were online. So we've got Linda O'Donnell, business psychologist and director at Zenith Consulting, Brett Townsley, the owner of Omniscient Safety Innovations and co-founder of the Make Minds Matter non-profit organisation. Dr. Ollie Fullion is chairman of AFBE UK Scotland, and Peter Duff, who's a diversity and inclusion advisor and coach. So we hear a lot of discussion about the need for diversity in organisations, about goal setting and the need for inclusion, but what does it actually mean? The business case for diversity has been well and truly made. The McKinsey 2019 Diversity Wins and 2020 Women in the Workplace reports cited a 25% increase in profitability for businesses with a gender diverse management team. This increased to 36% for those with ethnic and culturally diverse management teams. Diverse workforces have been proven to be more successful. But is it just about profitability? Where do we fit in as the people who make up the workforce? I personally believe that addressing issues such as bias and creating workplaces with an inclusive culture which are psychologically safe will ultimately lead to a reduction of stress, improve mental well-being for everyone, not just the women, not just the men, not just the marginalised groups, for everyone. That's my goal. So today, it's just the start of the discussion. We're assigning the hashtag Dare to Care, to the session and to this series. We know we won't cover everything in this 1 hour. So any questions that we can't answer today, we can take online on LinkedIn. We want to keep this conversation going and we encourage you to take part. So enough from me, I've said enough, let's get started. To kick things off, we want to show you a short video.
I think it's an important thing because many people have told me from my lectures it's the one thing they remember. Okay? I was sitting in a dentist's office and looked at an article that said, "How do lobsters grow?" I don't care how lobsters grow. But I was interested in it. And it points out that a lobster is a soft, mushy animal that lives inside of a rigid shell. That rigid shell does not expand. Well, how can the lobster grow? Well, as the lobster grows, that shell becomes very confining. Okay? And the lobster feels itself under pressure and uncomfortable. It goes under a rock formation to protect itself from predatory fish, casts off the shell, and produces a new one. Well, eventually, that shell becomes very uncomfortable as it grows, right? Back under the rocks. And the lobster repeats this numerous times. The stimulus for the lobster to be able to grow is that it feels uncomfortable. Right? Now, if lobsters had doctors, they would never grow. Because as soon as the lobster feels uncomfortable, goes to the doctor, gets a Valium, gets a Percocet, feels fine, never gets off its shell. So I think that we have to realize that times of stress are also times that are signals for growth. And if we use adversity properly, we can grow through adversity.
So interesting, and we just want you to have a think about that video for just now and hold that thought. We're now going to ask you a question. I'm just waiting for Katrina to put the question up online. Katrina?
Yeah, it should be there. Give me 1 sec. Yeah, it's there and people are answering.
Oh, is it? Right.
Yeah.
I can't see it. Apologies. Small technical issue there. Right, are the answers coming in? I guess I don't need to read it out then.
Yeah,
So yeah.
Please do that, Alison, and then we'll post you the results, but they're coming in.
So yeah, we just want everyone to answer. I can't see the question, so apologies for that. But it should say, do you think you have any hidden pre-existing bias? Or have you ever been on the receiving end of biased behaviour, whether in or out of the workplace? And we just want a really quick answer, the first thing that comes to your mind, yes or no, just to take a measure of how the audience is feeling today. How's that looking, Katrina?
Yeah, I think we have just about 60 votes. So if you give me a couple of minutes, I'll send you the results.
Right, perfect. I'm just going to read out a little bit more about unconscious bias before we move on to, we'll give you the poll results and we'll move on to our first speaker. I mean, unconscious biases are everywhere. From the neighbourhood we choose, the close friends that we have, the people that we date. Developments in neuroscience now show that many biases are formed throughout life and held at the subconscious level, mainly through societal and parental conditioning. So we have got a field of experts here tonight who are going to talk us through this topic. I'll be interested to see before we move on. Here we go. So 88% have said yes. So that's quite a phenomenal result, I think. And we've already got an audience that understand the concept, and that's fantastic. I'm really pleased. So let's move on. Linda, given your field of expertise, can you help us understand implicit bias? What causes it and what's going on in our brains when it happens?
Yeah, hi, thanks Alison. Yeah, I can do that. I'm just going to share my screen with you just now. I am quite overwhelmed by the result of the poll. I was expecting it to be high, but not that high. So, it's really a really interesting start. So what is unconscious bias, or sometimes known as implicit bias as well? So it refers to the associations that are made between different qualities and social categories, such as race, gender, disability, and our judgments that are made without conscious awareness, so we don't know that we're doing it. We can therefore state that prejudice or stereotyping counts as implicit bias, but only when it's likely to have a negative effect or a negative impact on an already disadvantaged group. And these automatic preferences or stereotypes are a major contributor to a lack of workplace diversity. So I'm just going to share my next slide with you. So this one slightly blows my mind, but the brain is exposed to 11 million bits of information at any given moment, but we can actually only consciously manage 40 out of that 11 million. So the vast majority is filtered through a perceptual lens driven by our unconscious mind, and our brain must quickly choose what to focus on for survival. So if you think fight or flight, we need to make inferences from that, or to categorize or experience emotions as well. So it all happens really, really quickly. Because the amygdala, which is part of the brain, I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment, is processing so much information it can't possibly interpret everything that it actually sees. So it takes shortcuts. And these shortcuts are then based on a lack of fully processed information, so that our interpretations are then flawed. And so we categorize to synthesize that information. So we might categorize along the lines of this person is like me, or this person is not like me. So that's the in-group, out-group phenomenon. So what I thought it would help to sort of bring it to life a bit is just to share a scenario where a male lead is conducting a staff meeting at an advertising agency, and those in the room are mostly male. The group is asked to brainstorm solutions for a campaign, and a female colleague offers a solution which is not acknowledged, but subsequently a male colleague offers the same solution, and not only is it acknowledged, but he receives praise for that as well. So although the workplace is male dominated, that on its own is not enough to create a biased environment. Although gender bias in the decision-making process is clear here, it's much more about the actions that follow from that. So I'm going to come back to this scenario again as we move through. But from a neuropsychology perspective, implicit or unconscious bias is a cognitive process which starts in the amygdala. I've got a nice helpful image of the brain here. Obviously, it's not got all the parts of the brain, but we use the amygdala to perform a rapid sort. So this idea of sort of filtering and sorting through information to sort people into groups. And the parts of the brain that are responsible for creating bias are the amygdala, the hippocampus. The hippocampus role is in learning and memory. The temporal lobe, which is its role is to process auditory information and to encode memory. And the media frontal cortex, which is responsible for decision making and memory as well. If we refer back to the earlier scenario, the male lead's unconscious choice to ignore his female colleague could be created by his amygdala and the bias attributed to previous socialization. So men are like me and women are not like me. And this bias happens in a split second, and the person holding the bias may not even be aware of it. And then the hippocampus that I mentioned before, so it's the role of the hippocampus to form links between memories and quickly decipher the meaning of data received. So it matches new incoming information with subjective memories. And if you think subjectively, it can be related to emotions. Again, that means that our thinking can sometimes be a bit flawed as well. And we're basically looking for a match. So is this data correct? So again, going back to our scenario, the male lead decides to follow through with the idea his male colleague proposed. The male lead subsequently feels confident in the success of his idea. So this sense of confidence that the male lead feels may have nothing to do with the content of the idea, but more to do with how his subjective memory has worked in a male-dominated space where other ideas were successful. So he basically creates this, this is what it's like, this is how it has been in the past, and this is how it will be in the future, thus forming the bias. The amygdala and the hippocampus are where the memories and information are processed, and explicit bias is associated with the left temporal lobe specifically, and that's responsible for converting sounds and words into meaning. So our male lead, back to our example again, his affinity for listening to male colleagues means that he will continue to affirm unconsciously, so it's not based on the facts, but the bias to listen to men more than women. Okay, so just to have a think about the impact. In short, it means that all voices are not being heard. And if we don't hear all the voices, we're missing ideas, we're missing divergent ways of thinking, we're missing different ways to problem solve. And all the table. And just to make this very topical, because the Euros are on just now, but if you look at it from a footballing perspective, you know, would you put a team on the pitch that were just full of strikers or full of
I think Linda's dropped off there.
Yeah, sorry, I think we've lost Linda. So we might need to move on, Alison, and then hopefully she'll rejoin us.
Yeah, she's just dropped right out, hasn't she? That's a shame. Okay, I know from Linda's presentation, we were touching on obviously what's happening within the brain, but also gender bias, which is something I can relate to. But we know that's not the whole picture. And I just wanted to move on to Brett. Brett, are you there? Yes, I can see you there. So yeah, lost my page, sorry. Yeah, Brett,
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, Alison. Yes.
would you like to give us your thoughts? Sorry about that. That was a tenuous link. I was looking at, I'm not, yeah, I apologise now for the lack of professionalism here.
No, don't get that. It's perfectly all right. It's perfectly all right. I don't know how I'll be able to follow up behind Linda, to be perfectly honest with you, because her in-depth study of the mind there was probably light years ahead of where I'm going to approach this. But what I'm going to try and do is add a little bit of context in terms of what we see within, particularly within the oil and gas industry, but within a multitude of different industries that we work with. And this is actually harm bias. So this is the bias that is created towards any particular type of harm that is created within the workplace. And we often see this in terms of mental health. So when we work with organizations, one of the first things I like to do is talk to them about, what is harm in your workplace? Because many of us have these zero banner programs, zero harm in our workplace. We will cause no harm. All of these great headline banners, which are absolutely right and should be as part of our duty of care. But we're under the illusion or the bias that physical safety is the only form of harm, and it's not. We can absolutely be impacted by emotional or psychological harm. The definition of harm actually says that. It says it covers a variety, not simply physical. However, systemically, what we have in our workplaces is a support that actually physical harm is of far more value than any other type of harm in our workplaces. And when we look at the causes or creators of stigma within our workplaces, and specifically in terms of workplace mental health, what we often see is the inability for people to step forward due to fear of repercussion or simply fear through being able to disclose. But we don't provide systemic approaches that allow this. We don't provide the same types of approaches that we do for physical safety. So we very openly promote, let's talk about safety, let's express, let's point out where these hazards are, let's figure out what they are, and let's do something about them. We expect that of our workforce, but we don't expect that of our workforce in terms of mental health. So what we create psychologically is our own barrier. We start to build our own stigma within the workplace in terms of mental health. This has been one of the phenomena that we've encountered in terms of, and I'll go back to the systemic side of these types of issues. When we talk about systemic racism or sexism, essentially it is a system that is built to give favour to one thing over another. And that's exactly what we do in terms of workplace safety or workplace harm. We create systems, we have systemic approaches that allow the information, that allow the identification, that allow the risk prevention for physical safety, but we don't have them for emotional safety. And again, as I say, this is in terms of what we see in the workplace, this is one of the main reasons why most people fear disclosing issues around mental health at work. Again, to use Linda's approach, if I was to give you a scenario around mental health within the workplace, and I said that a person who encountered a physical accident due to lack of training, the approach would simply follow investigation, root cause analysis, identification of where the problem is, and then preventative solutions put into place to stop that ever happening again. However, if I said to you a person was to encounter the same type of hazard, a failure to be trained properly, but they didn't encounter a physical injury, they encountered an injury in terms of emotional, so depression or anxiety, work-related stress perhaps, and we're off work for a period of time in relation to that, I doubt very highly whether many of us have processes in place that would allow us to investigate, identify the root cause of that, go back and apply preventative solutions to stop that harm ever happening again in our workplace. And until we can justify and validate the two and treat them as equally as they should be treated, we're going to continue to encounter this type of difficulty around disclosure. We're going to build our own stigma back into our workplaces, and we're going to create barriers for people coming forward. So think to yourself, when I think of harm, what does it mean to me? And if initially all you can think of is physical harm, then we need to look further. That's it from me, folks.
Thank you, Brett. I mean, when I first spoke about this, I had never even considered that. And I guess that's the whole topic of bias and, you know, people making assumptions about situations, I mean, it just covers such a wide breadth of topics, and I hadn't yet ever considered. And obviously, when you explained that to me, I was just blown away, and I thought, you're absolutely right. And it's about stigma and the stigma that's attached to mental health, and that's something that definitely needs to be addressed. So, thank you for sharing that. I know now that we have actually got Linda back, and we're going to try and get her back online to finish off her presentation.
Hello, sorry about that. Yeah, I was just about finished actually, but yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, drawn on this sort of footballing analogy, that, you know, you wouldn't put a team of just strikers on the pitch, or you wouldn't put a team of defenders on the pitch. You'd field your best team, and that team would be diverse and would have different skill sets. You know, we know that implicit bias has also had a negative impact on diversity. It has a negative impact on recruitment, also on retaining staff, and negatively impacts on shaping the organisational culture of businesses as well. And it's important to think about that from the perspective of, are you an employer of choice? You know, do people actually want to come and work for you because you've got the right sort of policies in place to make sure that there is diversity and inclusion. And it, as I say, it doesn't just relate to gender. I know the example I've used has focused on that, but it relates to race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, neurodiversity as well. You know, so we need to be more open to having different viewpoints to prevent groupthink as well. Okay, and that's me. Made it.
Not you for yet, because you'll all we'll be bringing you all back hopefully at some point later in the discussion. But yeah, I mean, Ollie, we've spoken at length about all of these topics, and you know, I could probably speak about this all day, and I know we don't have all day, so let's just move on. We would really like you to share, you know, why did you begin working in this field, and can you give us some more insight? I know that you can, but
thanks, Alison. Thank you. I've written just before I say that, I'll just say that just amazing contributions from Linda and Brett so far, and what Brett was talking about, this almost disparity or difference in the way that we view physical injury versus mental injury, reminds me of something that Nigel Boker, who's written a book on mental safety, says, where he says, particularly in reference to bullying, it says it should be as unacceptable as working at height without a harness. And I think that kind of really sums it up for me. But that particular point actually is very much the answer to your question. So I started off, I'm somebody who comes from a family of engineers. If I can use a Forrest Gump analogy, if you remember Bubba from Forrest Gump, who knew everything about the shrimping business, it's the way it feels with my family in engineering, because my dad considers himself to be number 23 in a line of family of engineers. And so, but from the age of 9, I decided I wanted to be a chemical engineer. By my 20s, I'd sort of had a PhD and started my job. And what started off from day one on my job, which in many other respects was quite successful, was a number of experiences, mostly of bullying, and the kind of bullying that everyone kind of knew and asked me, why are you being treated in that way? And to the point that it started to have a real major impact, not just on my mental health, but on my physical health, and led to a number of the difficulties that I still face today. At the time, the last thing I wanted to do was view some of the hostility I was getting from a particular person as racial bias, just because I generally didn't think much of people that were very quick to jump onto that potential as a reason for the difficulties that they might be facing. And so it wasn't something that I really wanted to speak to. But the more I was speaking to other people with a similar background to me, the more I realized that had something to do with some of the difficulties that I was facing. I'm speaking, of course, of racial bias. At that point, I decided that I was going to try and find somebody a little bit more senior within the organization who could help me. And what struck me at that point was that there weren't really that many people in the senior position who wore an engineering hat as well as an ethnicity hat. So it was really, and then we also met a lot of young people, particularly in the Croydon area, which is where I was living at the time, who fell prey of youth violence and some of the issues with knife crime. And 2007 was a particular flashpoint, if you like, in this spate of difficulty. And so it was really a desire for me to meet other people, a community of people who shared my engineering as well as my ethnic identity, and maybe to be able to talk to them about some of these issues, and also a desire to be role models within the community in which we were living in, that really led to the creation of AFB UK in 2007, which myself and my sister, who's also an engineer, founded. We started off with 5 engineers. We're now a UK-wide network of more than 1,500 engineers, and we also work with various organizations. And the 3 areas that we try to address as an organization is we're trying to get more people into the sector. We're trying to help more people be retained in the sector, because as many of you will know from some of the studies that have been carried out by the University of Oxford, for example, the GEM study that showed that even where you have exactly the same qualifications, same nationality or experience, pretty much same everything, apart from the fact that some names sound like ethnic names and some names sound like white sounding names, that you could have such a disparity that a typical minority, according to this study that was done, needed to send out 60% more applications in order to get a similar callback rate to somebody with a white sounding name. Or you had the case where people with a Nigerian sounding surname had to send out 80% more applications. And this is, you know, I'd advise everyone to look into that study. And so one of the things we try to do as an organization is to retain people, and then we also want to raise leaders. And the reason we want to do all of this is because modern racism isn't something that is overt. Very rarely will you find people actually use racial slurs. What you often find is what we often refer to as microaggressions. And until we are willing to go on the journey, what I call the Allyship Continuum journey, we're unable to recognize the impact of these biases, and we're unable to address them. I'd like to introduce you to something called the Allyship Continuum, which speaks about dealing with unconscious bias through allyship. It starts from a place of apathy. Most of us are in this place where we're not necessarily hostile people. Most people here would be horrified at the idea that they might hold any racial bias whatsoever. But most of us are in a stage where we're passive. We're not racist, but we're not anti-racist. We're not sexist, but we're not anti gender bias, and you know, you could apply that to some of the other areas. The ally must move from a place of apathy to a place of awareness, and what we refer to as awareness is developing empathy. Empathy and humility are the most important characteristics to have. What did we all feel as we watched the video of a black man under the knee of a policeman for 9 minutes, 29 seconds? We felt horrified that somehow the wonders of technology felt that we were sitting there, we were looking at it, and we developed empathy through that process. Most of the time, people are able to develop become allies to particular causes because they have close proximity. They have wives, they have sisters, they have people within their circle who identify with those experiences, and so they can develop empathy for it. But what often happens when it comes to things like gender, things like race, for example, is that it's quite possible to live your life, your actual life, not your working life, without people who are any different from you. Most of us come from homes where 99% of the people that walk through your doors are people with a similar identity to you. And because of that, sometimes empathy can be very difficult to develop, but we need to develop that. We then need to come to a point where we are are able to, are brave enough to interrogate our own beliefs, triggers, and unconscious biases, because we all have them. None of us were, as I like to say, none of us were brought up in a utopia of wokeness where everyone sort of accepts everyone. We've all come from backgrounds where we heard biases, we heard prejudiced views, and even when you didn't hear any of that, sometimes, as they say, it's not what's taught, it's what's caught. And sometimes we're all natural statisticians and we develop our views on that. And then another area that is very important to deal with is to understand the concept of unearned privilege. How do you define unearned privilege? Most of us have some form of privilege. We're a majority ally. Every one of us here is a majority ally to somebody. I have what I might refer to as ableness, physical ableness privilege. It means I don't have to think about, when I'm starting a job, about access ways in the way that a disabled person might not. I don't have to think about quite a number of things. And when we talk about white privilege, that's really what we're talking about. We're not saying that you've lived a life of privilege. We're saying that for all the challenges that you may have faced, it hasn't happened because of the color of your skin. Understanding unearned privilege is very important, because when we understand it, it becomes empowering. It's not a tool for us to wallow in some form of guilt about something that you have no responsibility for. It's understanding the power that you have as a member of a majority to make a difference for a minority. And at that point, we then need to start to understand allyship. The next parts of it have to do with activity and advocacy, and I'm sure there'll be time for us later to talk about that. I'll just point you to another sort of reframing of exactly the same concept, the Allyship Continuum. And this one's referring to a process, again, of moving from what I call a fear zone into a growth zone. As you see here in the fear zone, the person is in a state of denial that there is even such a thing as racial bias, is more prone to be suspicious when people talk about racial bias. They tend to not want to deal with anything that leads to discomfort, to a pace where they start to learn and understand these problems, where they start to embed themselves within the community of people who are different and really start to hear them out and understand their experience. And then a point at which we grow, we identify unknowingly how we may benefit from racism. We are able to deliberately yield positions of power to those who are otherwise marginalized. And the very important thing to remember is this process of going from the fear zone to the growth zone is very uncomfortable. And until we are ready to be comfortable being uncomfortable, we're not ready for the allyship trip yet. So I'm just going to stop there and listen to what others have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Ollie. Yeah, a couple of things sort of stuck out to me there, the unearned privilege piece and the moving from the fear zone to the growth zone, which I guess is potentially where we all need to be. I know you've touched on allyship. I've done a lot of reading on the topic, and I believe it's obviously a big part of what we need. Peter, as you know, Ollie's touched on allyship as an approach that we can all begin to take, because that was one of the key messages that we wanted to get across today, was that you know, there's actions that everyone can take on a day-to-day level. So can you maybe expand and give us some advice regarding what we can do as individuals to create a more inclusive environment and to mitigate bias?
Okay, thanks, Alison. Let me just check out you can hear me.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. And I just want to thank Ollie and Brett and Linda for their talks, which were great. And Ollie, I'm actually going to build quite a lot, I think, on what you've said, but I haven't got the beautiful charts that you had to show it. So, but Alison, I'm going to just go off piece slightly on this, because I've realised that I had a lobster experience a few years ago. I had just started as the head of diversity and inclusion for BP, for the EMEA region, for BP Group. And I decided I wanted to support our Pride network, the LGBT plus network. You know, it's Pride Month this month. And this was several years ago. And I found myself kettled in up in the top of Regent Street in London, kettled by the police in a crowd of about 1 million people, going nowhere for the whole afternoon. It was 3 or 4 hours in the beating heat, standing there very noisy, very hot, etc. And I had come to meet our LGBT plus people, and I actually had a great afternoon because I got to meet so many of them. And because we weren't actually doing much marching for Pride, we did quite a lot of talking. But what really struck me, and I hadn't expected that day and since, I try and go to this every year and also to Grampian Pride when I can, but what I hadn't expected was how many people would come up to me and say, thanks for showing up and thanks for being here, because we really value having allies here. And in particular, because I had just taken on a fairly senior role in BP, they said, and actually leaders generally don't show up for this stuff, which I think is quite interesting. In fact, the leaders that did show up, a couple of them looked in and then went straight down to the McKinsey party that was down in Trafalgar Square, but they didn't stay with the crowd marching. But what I got out of it, and it really was back to the awareness stage of Ollie's slide that he showed just now, was it helped start me on my journey to becoming an ally. And what I got reflecting back on that was I went that day feeling very uncomfortable and out of my comfort zone, a lobster coming out of its shell, you might say. But when I actually went away afterwards, what I'd done is I'd actually got to know quite a lot of the people leading our Pride network. Some of them have become very close colleagues and friends over a number of years, but I started to know them as people rather than just to think of them as a minority group that I wanted to be an ally for. And there's something there that's really quite important when we think about inclusion and being an ally, is that you really have to start with yourself. So ask yourself, am I inclusive? And it sounds easy to do, excuse me, it sounds easy to do, but honestly, it's not. It's much harder than you think. Because we tend to gloss over our own failings. So sometimes we're actually easier to see faults in other people than to see faults in ourselves. So if you ask myself, am I inclusive? The answer generally will be yes. And sometimes it's quite hard to see, well, am I really being inclusive? So the other thing is to ask your team, your colleagues, etc., those you work with. You might want to do this in a team meeting. You might prefer to do it personally to a few people that you'd like to, that you feel you can trust, and depending on how confident you are about what you might hear back, you may want to feel your way into it. But it is worth asking them. And I did this in a former role a number of years ago, and I found that, and from the feedback, that I favoured one of my team over others, and I favoured the one because that individual always delivered, and I felt I could trust them. What I didn't realise that was by my action of always going to this one individual with what might be the important tasks or the urgent tasks, I was actually implying that I didn't really trust the others. So I wasn't actually being equitable or fair to them. They were very good, but what I was doing was actually excluding them, and that wasn't creating a good team or a good effective way of working. I think another thing worth doing is asking your family or your partners and friends, and also asking people to tell you about yourself. Now we have to beware this because of Ollie's point, which is that we all have our own in-groups. So if you're asking your partners and friends, you may find you're kind of asking people like yourselves. So let's do a very quick experiment. We won't take very long on this, but this is an exercise that Stephen Frost, who some of you may know, has done a number of times. Stephen was the head of the diversity and inclusion for the 2012 Olympics. He's a very well-known writer on D&I and public speaker. And he had an exercise which I thought was really interesting. He said, and each of you just try doing this. If you've got a pen and paper, you can write it down. If not, just think of it in your head. Count your 3 close friends. Just think about 3 of your close friends. And then think about 3 of your colleagues. Colleagues now, colleagues you work with closely. A partner if you have one, or more partners than one if you have more than one. And 2 of your neighbours. And then stop and just think about that group of people. So you've got about 10 people there. How different are they from you on any measure? If you think of it on gender, on race, on sexual orientation, social background, education. In fact, for many of you being in Aberdeen and Highlands and Islands, how many of you are geographically from the locale? How many of you have travelled in from elsewhere? How many of you are expats, etc.? And what most people will find is that we tend to have an in-group of people that are actually broadly quite like ourselves. It doesn't always work. There will be somebody out there banging the table right now saying, that didn't work for me at all. That's not right. But actually, across society, generally, we tend to find we have an in-group and we tend to feel comfortable with them. As Ollie said, many of the people who would walk through your door will be very like you. So what we need to do is to seek out and value difference. So in your workplace, pick people who aren't, or pick people to talk to because you don't know them rather than because you know them well. So don't always go to the people you know and feel comfortable with. Seek out the people you don't know. Talk to them about their backgrounds, listen to what they do and listen to their jobs. It really doesn't matter what level in the organization they are or what they're doing relative to you, but take an interest in them. And surround yourself, as I say, with difference, with different people, different ideas, different views, different approaches, and get to know them. I worked for a number of years with MIT in Boston, traveled over there a lot, spent a lot of time staying in hotels, and I met the doorman at one of the hotels I stayed at, who was an Ethiopian man who'd come to the US. He worked really hard. He held down 3 jobs. And as I got to know him, I found he had 5 kids at university in the US and the UK. He was a very educated man who worked really hard and had just beautiful insights and wonderful insights on society and on the world. But I really only got to know that by getting to know him. And yet I'd see so many people who would just walk into the hotel, straight past the concierge and up to the desk and focused on themselves rather than on people around them. So I think that for me has always been an example of get to know the people you work with and the people who are around those that you work with. And finally, back to allies, back to Ollie's point that, you can be an ally by being there to kind of support and to listen, and to kind of show solidarity. But frankly, if you're not actually speaking up and calling things out or actually acting, then you're not really being a good ally. So you have to think about what actions can you take. Now, an example might be if there's a new graduate or an admin assistant in one of your meetings that's not getting a chance to speak, can you help to open up a door for them to come into the conversation? It might be if there's somebody new coming into the organization. We all know just how uncomfortable it feels that first day in a new job or in a new place. So think about what can you do that actually is active about reaching out to those people to try and make them feel more comfortable. You could also look out for safe space training, which I know it's been used a lot by Stonewall and others, but it will help you to put yourself in the shoes of others and to think, well, how will this feel for me? And finally, when you've identified those actions, think about this principle of respecting everyone. It doesn't mean you have to treat everyone the same, because the reality of work is that many people will have different roles at different levels of experience and expertise, but it doesn't mean you can't be respectful, firm and fair, no doubt, but respectful to everyone, listening to all the voices around you, not just the ones that are closest to you or that feel most comfortable. So let me leave it there, Alison. I have other comments to add, but like others, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Peter. No, that was really helpful. There's so many takeaways. And like we said, we wanted to be able to give people some practical things that they could go away with today and just start thinking about what they could do on a day-to-day level. We've got quite a number of questions and I'm very conscious of time. So I'd quite like to pick up on one which there's a recurring theme here, and I'll just read this one from the chat to perhaps Ollie on the subject of allyship. So allies play a critical role in creating an inclusive environment. However, too often difficult conversations are shut down because people get uncomfortable. They're anxious or scared, they say the wrong thing, they're scared that they might be put in the racist or sexist basket. And they're uncomfortable, so they just ignore it or they don't speak up. So I mean, what does it take to be an effective ally, or what would you say to somebody who's maybe feeling like that?
Yes, absolutely. That is it's a genuine fear that a lot of people have, that you could say the wrong thing and that could be the end of your job, or the people do actually have those fears. but the thing that I will remind people is this, that the ally plays such a powerful role, and in many ways without the ally no change ever happens, and so you know, there is a price to being an ally. Part of the discomfort that we spoke of is the fact that your intentions in some cases might be misunderstood. However, if we begin from a place of listening, if we begin from a place of really trying to understand, if we put ourselves, you know, I'd say empathy and humility are the two most important aspects to being an ally. So if we start from that place, we are less likely then to come to those conclusions or make those missteps. But even when we do, there's a friend of ours who was quite a senior person at BP, who is a very active member of the Positively Ethnic network there. And in her words, what she'd usually say is that when she first joined this network, the Employee Resource Group for Ethnicity within BP, in her words, she said a lot of stupid stuff is how she would describe it. But what often happened is that those who were members of this network knew that they knew her heart was in the right place. They knew that the reason she'd actually taken the step to join the group is because it came out of a desire to learn and then to support. And so they would very kindly say back to her exactly what they thought. And in that process, she was able to grow in that sense. So I think there's a certain level that the ally must be somebody who is willing to learn, willing to make those mistakes, because, you know, to quote the words of Desmond Tutu, if we're silent in moments of adversity, we've chosen the side of the oppressor, and that's something that should always be at the back of our minds. And so a willingness to learn, a willingness to make those mistakes. There's also a role on the part of those of us who consider ourselves to be champions of D&I, to carry people along and to understand that not everyone will say things exactly as you'd expect it, and we must be careful not to cancel, if you like, people just because of that, because every one of us is in a process of growth. We all make mistakes and we all need to learn.
Thank you, Ollie. I've got quite a few questions here. I'm trying to get to as many as possible. I am conscious of time. Another one here, perhaps for Linda. So there's various, what do you make of the recent evaluation report that unconscious bias training does not actually change behaviour? And is it possible to change this behaviour in a 90-minute webinar? I mean, I think we've covered a lot today, and perhaps Peter or Linda, would either of you two want to answer that question?
Yeah, I'm happy to comment on that. So I would say the short answer is no. 90 minutes in a webinar or a training of any description is not going to be enough to change behaviour, but it's a really good starting point because it's about increasing awareness at the end of the day. And for me, I'm quite keen as well to share those sort of practical steps and things that people can do. So it is about changing the culture. If it's within our workplace, it's about changing the workplace culture and saying that this type of behaviour is no longer acceptable. And you know, it's always said about understanding, learning empathy. And I think a really important way to do that, a really valuable way to do that, is to give people the opportunities to share their stories. And when we can listen to other people's stories, we can actually understand what it's like for them and what the experience is like for them. So, you know, there's lots of things that you can do, sharing stories, you know, and I think Peter mentioned this as well, being able to sort of reflect, ask yourself that question, hold a mirror up to yourself and say, do I actually do this? Do I behave in this way? Creating that safe space, you know, increasing awareness, having a conversation about unconscious bias, you know, learning about it. It just, again, follows the model that Ollie shared as well, but it's not a quick fix, and it is something that takes time to have that embedded in the culture. But I wouldn't sort of say that organisations should think along the lines of do unconscious bias training, like that's the box ticked, a bit like mental health. You know, we've done this, now we can move on and do something else. It's an ongoing thing, definitely.
And Alison, for just to briefly add to that, I think this came out from the UK Government Equalities Office, their behavioural insights team, that found no evidence that unconscious bias training actually improved the equality in the workplace. And they were phasing it out across the civil service. But actually, what they're doing in place of that is actually integrating unconscious bias into inclusion and diversity, into mainstream training. So the message, I think, is that there's been some pretty poor unconscious bias training around, not that awareness of unconscious bias isn't important. There's a couple of slides that Alison, I know you have them and you can pass them on to people afterwards, but people could try the Harvard implicit association tests, which are very interesting to understand your own biases. There's a link in the slides to those. And also, we haven't got time today, but I work with a very interesting startup organization called Virtual Bodyworks that looks at using virtual reality embodiment to help you to put people in roles in a role for somebody of a different race or a different gender. And that's proving quite interesting, and the scientific evidence shows that bias, when addressed in that way, you can measurably improve your progress. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Katrina, can I do one more question?
Yeah, absolutely. You're in charge.
There's two more. Right. What words or questions can be used to gently point out when someone has said something biased? Not to cancel them, but to nudge them to self-awareness or understanding. Ollie?
Well, yes. I mean, it's a real good question from Irina. There are loads of ways. Humor is a very, very powerful way of sometimes pointing out to people. You know, if somebody, I remember in Total, we were being taught a new form of timesheet. Time writing, and we had this guy who was external to Total who'd come in to share it, and my colleague Karen, who's a very, very clever chemical engineer, asked the question about a particular feature, and the trainer responded by saying, "Oh, for admin staff, this is what we do," and he'd made the assumption. And I've often thought about it because I didn't say anything, but perhaps something along the lines of what was it about this person that made you assume that they were, and you know, done with a smile and in a sort of light-hearted way, may have been a good way of just pointing out to the person who'd made the assumption their own biases, which you know we all have, and you know, so there are multiple there are various ways, but. I think trust is very important, and I think the other thing is for the ally who's worried about making a mistake. There's a really good quote from Brené Brown that I like to use a lot, and what she says is that empathy is not so much linking up with is not so much identifying with an experience. It's identifying with the emotions that underpin that experience. That is far more important than what one says or doesn't say, what mistakes one makes or doesn't make. It's being able to identify with the way that experience or that lived experience makes the other feel. And I think when that's communicated, we will make mistakes, but you know we'll hopefully learn those mistakes and are able to get beyond them.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to do one more audience question, which I have here, and then we'll move on to our closing. So this one here is, when seeking to know people who are different from you, and be an ally, or just to get to know everyone in your workplace, I'm assuming. So if it's misinterpreted as seeking out favors, or considered as a sellout, how would you deal with that as an ally? So I guess, yeah. You want to be an ally, so how can you go about that? I guess you want to be genuine. You want to appear genuinely interested in people. But Peter, could you maybe answer that one?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. What it reminds me of was a conversation with a lady called Sandra Kerr, who's the she's actually got an MBE recently. She's the head of business in the community's race campaign, and we were at a meeting where we were discussing BAME and race, and people saying, well, you know, it was one of those conversations about, well, but what do I call people who are black, or, you know, people of color, or what terms can I use in this country? Obviously it's different in the States, etc. And it was a long conversation, and eventually Sandra stood up and kind of said, look, just kind of to cut through this, I think if you're genuine and you just start the conversation, then that's what really matters. So it's a question about being genuine. You're not going to get it right all the time. I think if people are suspicious about why you want to come and talk to them about their jobs, then, you know, it's your job. It's your job to put them at ease. Certainly in BP, I know there's been many times over the years where you might think, well, why does one of the senior leaders suddenly rock up and want to come and talk to people? But, you know, mostly there's a bit of a photo call publicity about that. But when the genuine ones come and say, I really am interested in what you want to do, it's a completely different feeling. So I think it's about authenticity mostly. And I look for Ollie or Brett or Linda to add to that.
Yeah, would anyone like to add to that?
Just really to agree more than anything else, I think that's absolutely spot on. Yeah, I think you have to, you know, be your authentic self, and, you know, I don't think any of us would ever set out deliberately. Well, most people I know wouldn't set out deliberately to say the wrong thing or upset someone. But going back to what Ollie mentioned before about fear, if you know, if we're so debilitated by fear, we won't do anything at all. And actually, we need to take action. We need to dare to care. So there you go. Just shoehorn that in there. Well done, me.
Thank you, Linda. Right, we are just about finished, but we would like to give you some information about the EI Benevolent Fund, which is a fantastic resource that not many people know about. So Katrina, I'm going to pass over to Katrina to explain this to you.
Hi there, hopefully you can see my screen. Oh no, I've gone back. One second. Yes, so very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, I just wanted to highlight the fact that the Energy Institute has a scheme which has been running for, well, it's been running for the last 2 and a bit years. It's called EI Enable. It's a confidential service for EI members, and it's a 24/7 resource for anybody who has any issues from personal to mental health, stress problems, finance, etc. It's funded by the Benevolent Fund, which has been running for the past, gosh, I think 50 odd years now. Yeah, the number is on the bottom of the screen, but the best way is to go onto our website and look for the EI Enable site. So yeah, just a very quick mention that that's a fantastic resource for our members and their dependents. That's me, Alison. You're up.
I'll mute this time. Thank you. No, it's a resource that's there, which not, you know, we don't publicise enough, so we need to do better, because I think it's a fantastic resource, which could be used by a lot of people. We have a last question for each speaker. We're going to time you 30 seconds each. Can you please give us what you would like, or what you think the main points of the conversation today should be, the key takeaway for the audience? Peter, first.
Okay, right. I'm going to do mine very quickly then. So I think the key message is respect everyone and value difference. As my boss used to say, treat everyone the way you want to be treated. But actually, within the principle of dare to care, I think you can go further than that. I think what you should be saying is treat people the way they would want to be treated. So, you know, so I'll leave it at that. But think about, you know, respect everyone. And if you don't like what you see, change it.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. I'm just going around in the order that you had on my screen. So Ollie, you're next.
Well, that was a powerful one. The point I'd like to make is, what do you think of when you think of an ally? What's the picture in your mind? I think for a lot of people, it's a picture of, you know, that front picture of Friends where you have all these people sitting there on a sofa at the start of Friends, but real allyship is more like Gladiator, because there is a price to pay for allyship. And then the last thing I will say is, for everyone, what do you consider to be your blind spot? Because we've all got one.
Thank you. Brett, I know you're off camera, so are you there? Yes.
Yep, I am indeed, Alison. Yeah, I guess from my side then, I think probably what I would suggest to take away from this is it's not simply about that. There's been a lot of talk around the individual and how we view things, but also specifically in terms of your workplace should be applying systemic solutions to this, because simply talking is not enough now. Action is required to follow through with it. So my one would be, dare to ask your business what they do to care for you. If you get to your next mental health awareness week, or ladies week, or men to health week, simply say to the business, instead of them saying, this is on you, talk about mental health, talk about these things, say to the business, I want to talk to you. What is the business doing to change this? What is the business doing to care for me? So ask the question back. That would be my takeaway.
Fantastic. I'm loving these answers, actually, and I'm glad we're recording this session. Linda, over to you.
Oh gosh, what's left to say? Everyone's just said such amazing things, and I completely agree with them. But yeah, it's we can't be ruled by fear. People can't just stand and do nothing. It's time for action. I think we've got the evidence now that we know that we have that evidence from the OG UK, for instance, about where the problems lie, and we need to do something about it. And it needs to come from leaders. So the leaders need to feel confident enough to have those difficult conversations and to change and grow.
Thank you. I'm very, very conscious of time, so I would like to pass you over to Ritika for some final thoughts, and then we'll get to the event close. Ritika?
Can you hear me? Perfect. So hello everyone, and I hope you enjoyed the event as much as we did planning the event for you all, and must say interesting conversations. I would like to quickly quote a phrase from the book Blind Spot: Hidden Biases of Good People, and the quote is as, "The first step to defeating our hidden biases is to be honest with ourselves about the blind spots we have. Having a bias is only human. The only shame is in making no effort to improve. And human beings are an improving species. We have been improving ourselves in every way over millennia." And this quote is actually by Dr. Mahazareen Banaji, who is co-author of this book. We will also get the details on LinkedIn if you want to go ahead and read this book. It will be an interesting read for sure. Quickly, I would now just pass it to Suli for the thank you note. Suli, to you now.
Thanks, Ritika. Thanks to all our panelists today. Really inspiring discussion. I'd like to thank everyone that took the time out of their busy day to attend today's event, and I hope to see you very soon.
Thank you, Suli. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone who attended. Thank you to all our participants. Thank you to the organising team. I've really enjoyed putting this together, and I'm really looking forward to the conversations that we're going to have in the future. As we mentioned, we want this to be a series. We want you to join in the conversation. So join us on LinkedIn, #DareToCare. And we do have other questions that came today that we just didn't have time to get to. So we're going to look at getting some answers out there. We'll do a follow-up email. We've got some links and information. Peter's kindly put together some resources, and we've also got quite an extensive reading list. So we would like to share information with you, just stuff that we've used in planning today's event, and obviously stuff that our panelists have put together for you. So we'll get that out on email as soon as we can, along with the recording and links to the recording. So without further ado, we've got one final question for everyone just before we go, and that is, are you aware, I know that the answer is to this, but are you aware of your pre-existing biases? And do you now dare to care? Thank you.